A lot of work's been going on board the International Space Station to return one of the EMUs, the Extravehicular Mobility Unit, the U.S. spacesuits, back to service. Scott Kelly back inside the airlocks today, but he's been in there quite a bit over the last week. And today we're going to learn a little bit more about what's been going on. Joining me here in Mission Control Houston today, one of our EVA experts, Alex Kanelakos. Alex, you're kind of a regular on this show nowadays. We always bring you in when we're talking about these spacesuits, and it's really great to have you here with us now to give us a little bit more insight into what's been going on.
Well, good morning, Dan. Glad to be here.
So first, just set it up for us. What's been going on? Because we've heard this is some of the most invasive, some of the most complex repair work you guys have ever had to do on these spacesuits. What's been happening?
Right. So what we've been dealing with is a failure of one of our fan pump separators, and this is what I'm holding here today. It's a 3D rapid prototype of our fan pump water separator, and we've had several issues on orbit with the fan pump separators. And recently, well, in February, we actually had another failure, and we decided that we would remove the fan pump separator from EMU 3011. This suit was scheduled to come home this summer on SpaceX, and we decided, well, we'll bring the water separator and the fan pump home early and just leave that suit with an open cavity. Well, unfortunately, our resupply, our new spacesuit that was also supposed to launch on SpaceX, did not make it. And instead of bringing the old 3011 home, we had to put a new fan pump separator installed into this open cavity and get it back to service, get the EMU back to service. And so in order to do that, like you mentioned, it's very invasive. We're opening cavities that were never meant to be opened during on-orbit phases. So on the ground, of course, when the spacesuit gets home, the engineers do a lot of servicing on the different pieces. There's very small screws, small shims that they'll take apart, and it was never designed to do that on orbit. And the reason that this is really critical that we do it right is these small pieces could really damage the suit, especially when we go out EVA. It's something that we don't want to have floating around inside the spacesuit. So that's part of it. Another part of it is once we get the fan pump separator installed, there's a lot of water maintenance that has to happen. Our suit is very sensitive to water impurities, and so we have to basically scrub the water that's going through the suit. We also have to add iodine to help combat any of the organic components inside the suit, and that's what we've been doing the last week. So Scott and Chell have both been working on the suit, and they've been installing the fan pump separator. We also did a couple more maintenance activities such as a gas trap removal and replace and a waterline vent tube. So several components we replaced on the spacesuit, and then we got into our water maintenance. So last week we did a water dump and fill where we dumped our old water and filled it with new water, and then we started this week with scrubbing the water, and today we're doing a structural integrity test to make sure that the fan pump separator was installed correctly and that we're not going to have any leakage when we go outside the next time.
Okay, and you kind of touched on it, but why is it important to do these upgrades to make sure these suits are ready to go? Even though we're not doing an EVA tomorrow, why is it important to have this thing ready for prime time, ready to go?
Right. So the design of EVAs is that we'd always have 4 spacesuits ready to go at all times. And the reason for that is that we never know when one spacesuit's not going to necessarily check out correctly. We want to give our crew members the best suits to go out the door with. Spacesuit is like its own spacecraft. Once it's disconnected from umbilical and goes out during an EVA, it's on its own. It's life support. Everything is there for the crew members. So we want to make sure we're giving the best spacesuits for our crew members. And in addition to that, the spacesuits are sized differently. So the hard upper torso, there's 3 different sizes, and so they're connected to the life support, and so those have different sizes. And so in order to give us the best complement of spacesuits with the crew members that we have on board, we have different sized huts. And to basically strategically match what spacewalks could happen, that's how we size our spacesuits. There are like you mentioned, there are no scheduled EVAs in the near future. There are some talks about some EVAs happening in late October or early November timeframe. But we can always have the need to go out the door. If we have a major failure of space station where we have to go and replace a critical component. That's why we have to be ready with our spacesuits.
Okay, and so you said, so there's, once this one's back online, there's going to be 4 suits. And then aside from the suits, you guys have spares and other things like that on board too. Like you had a spare fan pump ready to go. You know, what's the state of supplies for all that?
That's correct. So we do have several spares of the critical components of our life support. In addition, we have lots of spares of our what we call the soft goods, more the sizing portions, and that allows us to adapt to the different crew members. We're fine as far as spares are considered on orbit right now.
Okay, and one thing you had touched on earlier that I thought was interesting was these suits weren't designed to necessarily be repaired like this. So I mean, this has to be a really difficult task. You know, take something, and I assume you do a lot of work here down on the ground first, but to figure out how to fix something that was never meant to be fixed in this fashion.
That's correct. So we work hand in hand with the ground engineers to develop procedures for the crew members to repair the spacesuit and do this invasive removal and replacement of critical components. So you're right that we have to design new procedures. We also work with the crew on just training them. All right, these are components that are loose. Once you release this screw, it's free. So we have to be prepared for that. We use a lot of Kapton tape, and we even have a vacuum cleaner with a netting over it ready to capture anything that comes loose that the crew members aren't able to grab, and that's really important. And in addition, some of the things that you don't think about on the ground is that you have to have ways to restrain your body when you're up there. So the suit, in order to install this fan pump separator, it can't be structurally attached so that it's completely rigid. We actually have to allow it to kind of move in order to gain access to this area, and so that can be really difficult for the crew members because they're not restrained. As far as normally being restrained, like you have 2 feet on the ground, so we have to give them advice of, all right, here's a good handhold here, and things like that while they use the tools on orbit.
So we're having to repair something that wasn't meant to be repaired in an environment that we can't test, and I mean, it sounds tough. So I mean, we're always looking forward. We're always looking forward. What are some of the things, we've been using this suit for decades now. What are some of the things that we're learning from having to do this kind of stuff on space station that we're hopefully going to be able to apply to suits, when we're heading off to Mars?
Yeah, that's a great point. The spacesuits, in big picture, people think of spacesuits as this is how you're using the space station as far as maintaining it. The spacesuits allow us to get basically into our mobility to go outside the door and repair things and make sure that we're keeping our space station up and running. But in addition, we are using the spacesuits as kind of an experiment in themselves when we go to different locations or to even improve on the next spacesuit. So we are learning a lot of things. Just doing the removal and replacement, we're learning, all right, we need to design our next spacesuit so that we can gain access to critical components easier. We need to make sure that the fasteners and the bolts that are installed are captive so that when you release them, they're not going to be floating away.
Go flying away.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of those things. In addition, we're learning design because of what caused the failure. We're learning how to design new components, so that they're more resistant to water impurities and they're more resistant to corrosion, things like that.
Okay. Well, again, a lot of really invasive but a lot of really important work taking place in those spacesuits over the last week or so on board space station. Alex Kanelakos, our local resident EVA expert, giving us the inside look. Thanks again so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Dan.